Hello, welcome everybody to this online webinar, Not Extra, Embedding Anti-Racism into Curriculum. My name's Justin Roberts and I'll be hosting today, and I'm joined by a very special guest in Jeremy Kalbstein. Welcome, Jeremy. We welcome everyone in the room with us today, as well as everyone who's watching the recording in their own time. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. Before we begin, we'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands and waters where we live and work, and recognise that our work is delivered on many lands across this great nation. Today, I'm coming in from Bunurong country, and you're welcome to place the country you are on in the chat. We celebrate that Australia is rich in living Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures based on strong values and respect for elders. We pay our respect to ancestors of this country, elders, knowledge holders, and leaders past and present. We acknowledge through the grief and the loss that First Nations people have endured, and we celebrate their survival and resilience. We stand in solidarity now and always, acknowledging that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have never ceded sovereignty in Australia. We also acknowledge that the lands on which we live and work have been the lands of learning and teaching since the beginning of time. Always was, always will be. So welcome everyone. My name's Justin Roberts, National Program Director from the MacKillop Institute. As I said, I'm joined by Jeremy Kalbstein, who's the Director of Education at Click Against Hate. This series of webinars is a partnership between the MacKillop Institute and Click Against Hate. You might have noticed on the title slide that Chris Higgins, the director at the MacKillop Institute, was on that slide. He will be joining you for the rest of this series. Unfortunately, he's unwell, so I'm standing in for him today. But this is one in a series of four. I guess, learning opportunities, 2 that are webinars and 2 that are face-to-face. And today will really be about 2 25-minute presentations. So Jeremy's the star of the show, and we'll hear from him shortly, followed by myself, and then followed by a Q&A session with a 5 o'clock ending. So with that Q&A, please use the chat to place your questions in, and we'll get to as many as we can in that last half hour. And just a bit of pre-warning too, that this session will be recorded for those who can't make it, and will be sent and emailed as well. So a bit of introductions. As I said, my name is Justin Roberts. I work for MacKillop Family Services as part of the MacKillop Institute, but my journey at MacKillop started some years ago now, well over a decade ago, in our schools. So MacKillop Family Services is one of Australia's biggest community service organisations. A lot of that work, so all that work is working with vulnerable children, young people and families, whether that be in out-of-home care, so residential care, foster care, kinship care, family services, disability services. And as I said, my joining of MacKillop was at MacKillop Education with both our outreach programs as well as our schools in Victoria and New South Wales. But now my work is as part of the MacKillop Institute, who with our aim being able to share that practice from across MacKillop Family Services, we obviously get an opportunity to work with many great experts and leaders in their field, including, for example, today with Jeremy. And as part of our mission in trying to work with and improve the lives of those children and young people who often society can marginalise. The MacKillop Institute's role is to share that and empower other organisations who work with children and young people too. So I guess probably part of the ending of that is I'd like to welcome you, no matter your role. I will refer to you all as educators, and that's anyone who works with children and young people, we believe are educators in no matter what your role is. But, we want to thank you because we know many of you are the people who are on the ground doing this work day in and day out with our children and young people. And what a noble and purposeful work that is. As I said, we're joined today. This is a partnership between the MacKillop Institute and Click Against Hate. Probably aligned, and I know Jeremy will speak about Click Against Hate as well, but like all our partnerships at the MacKillop Institute, we do that based on essentially mission and wanting to do the best for children and young people, and Click Against Hate certainly aligns with that. So a big thank you to them and a warm welcome to Jeremy. Without further ado, I think it is time to hand over to Jeremy, and who's, as I said before, definitely the star of the show today. So I'm looking forward to this presentation as much as anyone else. So thank you very much, Jeremy, for being with us today.
See what this all of you in a meeting.
Oh, sorry, that wasn't me, by the way. Thanks, Justin. Let me just get my my presentation on. Clicked on the wrong button. 1 second. All right. Hopefully you can all see that. There. Excellent. So yeah, thank you very much, Justin. And yes, I'm the Director of Education for Click Against Hate, but I'm not going to talk about Click Against Hate just yet. I'll save that towards the end of the webinar. But what I'd like to do to start with is to ask a question. And so my question is, and you're welcome to respond in the chat, and I'll just keep talking away basically as you do that. How many of you feel like the curriculum is already full, overcrowded even, and yet every year there seems to be something new that we're asked to include? There's digital citizenship, there's well-being, media literacy, critical thinking, and sometimes conversations about racism, discrimination, or inclusion can feel like they're sitting in that same category. Important, but difficult to find space for. So what I want to suggest today is that this work doesn't actually sit outside the curriculum. In many ways, it's already embedded within it. So if students are analysing perspectives in English, evaluating historical sources in HASS, or discussing fairness and responsibility in health, they're already developing the skills that underpin anti-racism and anti-discrimination education. A teacher I worked with once, a long time ago, experienced this in a Year 8 history class when a student asked, "Why are all the people in these photos men?" That one question shifted the entire conversation of that class. As curriculum scholars Grant Wiggins and Jay McTeague argue, powerful learning often comes not from adding more content, but from sharpening the questions we ask within what we already teach. And that's really what today is about. Not adding more content, but strengthening what's already there. Teachers are working in an environment of intense curriculum pressure. There's reporting demands, differentiation, well-being responsibilities, and so on. So when a topic like anti-racism or anti-discrimination is raised, it can understandably feel like something additional. As I said already, today is not about adding content. It's about examining what is already embedded within the Australian curriculum and making it more intentional. As educational researcher Gloria Ladson-Billings reminds us, effective teaching is not about extra programs, but about strengthening the relevance and rigor of what we already teach. The question is not whether this fits, it's where it already exists. So I want today to be a bit practical. So we're going to go have a look at the Australian curriculum now, and it requires students to analyse perspectives, to evaluate fairness, to understand ethical implications, and engage respectfully with diverse viewpoints. And those expectations are not optional. They're embedded across learning areas. The general capabilities, particularly ethical understanding, intercultural understanding, and critical and creative thinking, explicitly position students to question bias, consider multiple perspectives, and reflect on responsibility. If we're teaching students to interpret text, analyze historical sources, evaluate media, or design solutions responsibly, we're already working in this space. Anti-racism and anti-discrimination education most powerfully live inside curriculum skills, not standalone lessons. In English, students examine representation and voice. In HASS, they investigate systems and democracy and historical narratives. In health, they explore identity and belonging. In technologies, they evaluate ethical design and data use. And this aligns with what the Australian curriculum describes as developing informed, reflective, and active citizens. The foundations are already present. The general capabilities provide a practical entry point. Ethical understanding asks students to explore concepts like fairness, justice, and responsibility. Intercultural understanding asks students to examine identity, empathy, and perspective. Critical and creative thinking requires students to analyze assumptions and evaluate reasoning. These aren't political positions, they are disciplinary skills. And research consistently shows that when these capabilities are embedded within subject content rather than treated separately, student engagement and depth of understanding increase. So let's unpack the English curriculum as an example. And we'll start with years 5 and 6. So you can see here we have the code on the left. In the middle, we've got what, sort of a summary of what one of the core skills may be for that particular code or content descriptor. And then we have what the connection may be to anti-racism and inclusion. So I'd like to focus on this particular code, AC9, E5, and 6 for LY06, which, as a quick refresher, it's these two content descriptors we're looking at for anybody who doesn't teach English in years 5 or 6. Have a quick glance at that. You don't need to read the whole thing, just get a bit of an idea, a bit of the gist of what it's about. And so essentially the core skill here is about creating texts. I don't know why I put 4 audiences there, because it's pretty much what you would do any text for. And the connection to anti-racism and inclusion would be about challenging stereotypes through writing. Now, almost 2 years ago, I was sitting in my lounge room on the couch with my good friend, highly successful New York Times bestselling author by the name of Adam, and my laptop was hooked up to my TV, and we were very excitedly creating our characters for the romantic comedy script that we were writing. Yes, I have written a rom-com. Now, our male protagonist was a Caucasian male. His best friend and sidekick was a Caucasian male. Our female protagonist was a Caucasian female. And her best friend and sidekick was, you guessed it, a Caucasian female. So I turned to Adam and I said, do you think we need to have some diversity amongst our characters? So Adam, being the language freak that he is and, very successful writer, he looked at me, his eyebrows raised, his lips pursed together, and he shrugged, I don't know. So I followed up with a second question. Is it even our responsibility? Adam's nose wrinkled, his mouth opened, then closed, and he shook his head. I really don't know. So now our purpose for writing this rom-com was simply that we had an idea that we thought would be a fun project to do together and that we would both love to see made into a movie. What we hadn't realized until that moment was how much more we had to consider beyond simply writing. It raised a lot of interesting thoughts and resulting discussion. What was our social responsibility? What social impact could this potentially have on our audience, or even in relation to attracting producers? As comedic writers, was this even our responsibility? And this is the really conflicting part that we discussed. If we were to consider different perspectives, how could we write from their perspective without stereotyping? So we were challenging stereotypes from the outset. And the years 5 and 6 English curriculum already requires students to identify bias, to analyze representation and perspective, to compare diverse viewpoints, and to create texts that shape attitudes and meaning. So moving on to the year 7-8 English curriculum, and specifically this code here, AC9E7LY05, which is about using comprehension strategies such as visualizing, predicting, connecting, summarizing, monitoring, questioning, and inferring to analyze and summarize information and ideas. So essentially, a core skill here could be about comparing texts. And the connection to anti-racism and inclusion, as you can see there, is about comparing perspectives and identifying dominant or marginalized viewpoints. So last year, Adam and I met with an entertainment lawyer for some advice and to see if he had any producer contacts. By the way, if anyone here knows a producer, I'd love to talk to you. Side note. Anyway, we shared our synopsis with him and he asked us this question. He said, the script is called Kiss Cam. So we nodded. And your main male character's name is Todd. Again, we nodded enthusiastically. So why didn't you name your male character Cam? So Adam and I both sucked in a quick breath and looked at each other. And then Adam turned to me. How did we not think of that? I shrugged, feeling my cheeks redden. We immediately responded with, that's brilliant. We'll change his name. Fast forward to earlier this year, and Adam was again at my place. He was sitting beside me at my dining table again. And we were trying to reduce the length of it from about 120 pages down to around 110. We've managed to get to about 112, and that's as far as I think we're going to get it. So suddenly Adam turned to me and he said, there are 2 jokes here that don't work with the name Cam. You see, the jokes were based around his name being Todd, or at least in relation to his initials. So we had to decide whether the jokes were too good to remove, meaning we would have to revert back to Todd, or to remove the 2 jokes entirely, which wasn't just about removing those sentences, but also the build-up to the jokes. Now, and we didn't agree on it, so we had to have a big discussion about what we should do. So our intention had always been to have dual protagonists of equal importance. So I turned to Adam and said, the name of the movie is Kiss Cam. If we name the male character Cam, we're elevating him above the female character. They're no longer equal. They're no longer on level ground. So our main male protagonist name is officially Todd. So you could easily use this script as one text to compare with another text and explore the perspectives and identify the dominant or marginalized viewpoints. And the year 7-8 English curriculum explicitly requires students to analyze representation, identify bias, evaluate attitudes and values in language, to compare perspectives, critique arguments, and construct purposeful texts. These requirements provide clear curriculum legitimacy for structured exploration of stereotypes, prejudices, inclusion, diversity, acceptance, and anti-racist thinking. Not as add-ons, but as rigorous textual analysis and literacy outcomes. And that brings us to year 9 and 10 English curriculum. Again, we'll look at this one here, AC9E10LA02, which is about understanding that language used to evaluate implicitly or explicitly reveals an individual's values. So a core skill here could be around framing and influence, and it's about detecting subtle stereotyping in terms of the connection to inclusion and anti-racism. So if you'll indulge me, we'll return to the rom-com story. I'm making it into a trilogy by the looks of it, and how it is a very familiar rom-com setup. So there's an obnoxious, overly confident marketing executive named Todd. He works at a big advertising agency. He talks fast, he dresses sharply, and he thinks every problem in the world can be solved with branding and a clever tagline. If the moon fell out of orbit, Todd would say, great, let's rebrand it. Then there's Ruby. Ruby works for a charity helping seriously ill children. She's practical, grounded, and if we're using classic rom-com archetypes, she's the cynic who doesn't believe in love anymore. So right away we have stereotypes, the corporate guy and the idealistic charity worker. And of course, they're an opposites attract pairing. They meet, clash, and at first they look exactly like stereotypes. But as they work together, something shifts. Todd begins to understand the real impact of the charity. Ruby begins to realize she's not cynical because she's cold. She's just been protecting herself. Of course, this being a rom-com, there's a misunderstanding, a breakup, and finally a grand gesture. And that's why the story works. It starts with stereotypes, but the characters don't stay there. The arrogant guy becomes empathetic. The cynic learns to trust again, because the most meaningful stories and relationships happen when we move beyond the stereotypes we start with. See if you can tell where this would fit within the years 9 and 10 in English curriculum, which explicitly requires students to analyse ideology, identify bias, evaluate representation, critique argumentation, compare perspectives, examine how power operates through language. This provides strong curriculum alignment for rigorous exploration of racism and systemic bias, stereotyping in media and literature, representation of identity, inclusion and marginalisation, and ethical audience positioning. These, again, are not add-ons. They're embedded within the analytical expectations of English in the Australian Curriculum V9. One of the risks in this space is tokenism. And what do I mean by tokenism? It could be a one-off lesson, it could be a themed day, or even a surface level celebration that isn't revisited or assessed. Christine Sleater's research on multicultural education cautions that token approaches can unintentionally reinforce stereotypes if they are not connected to deeper inquiry. On the other hand, embedding looks quite different. It means planned integration within units, connection to assessment criteria, and examining systems and languages, not just individual behavior, but not just individual behavior. Depth, not volume, is what creates impact. And embedding beats adding. Now, a practical way to do this without increasing workload is through backward design. Wiggins and McTeague describe effective curriculum planning as starting with the desired understanding, then identifying evidence of learning, and finally planning learning experiences. So instead of asking what activity could I add, we ask, what do I want students to understand about fairness, representation, or voice? Where are they already demonstrating that understanding in assessment? What small adjustment to questioning or text selection could deepen it? Often the structure of the unit remains unchanged. The lens, though, becomes sharper. So another workload reducing strategy is shared conceptual language across departments. If English is exploring representation in text and HASS is examining representation in historical narratives, students encounter reinforcement rather than repetition. Many years ago, when I was still in the classroom, I began working at a school in Melbourne, and my role was to create and teach all the subjects for digital media and design, which is a new stream within the art department, for years 5 to 8. And this comprised of 8 subjects, such as digital game making, stop motion, claymation, digital advertising, and so on. It was a lot of fun. Now, the first year proved to be so successful that the uptake for the second year, particularly for the year 7 and 8 electives, resulted in there being too many students and therefore too many classes needing to be created for me to be able to teach with my teaching load. So we seconded an English teacher with a background and interest in digital media and design. I had a vision where we would be supporting students learning across the learning areas, and I wanted to prove that this could be done successfully. And as this other teacher was a Year 8 English teacher, I asked him what they were studying at that time. And he told me they were doing a dystopian book called Uglies by Scott Westerfeld. And if you haven't read it and you like that genre, I highly recommend it. I believe that turned into a movie on Netflix as well. Anyway, we tasked our students with a project to create their own dystopian story and build it within a virtual world. So we were reinforcing what they were learning in English. So here's a video. It's a video reflection of one of my students from this project. And I apologize in advance for the audio that she put on in the background. It can make it a bit hard to hear what she's saying, but it'll just give you a bit of an idea of what they did in relation to it.
Okay, so this is my character. Her name is AJJ2. Everyone's named after numbers, so it's pretty basic. The land is all pretty small. This is all there is because it's all been taken away in global warming and things like that. So it's in the future by quite a bit to have all the other land to be destroyed. And so yeah, this is my land from bird's eye view. If you look at it, it's just the area that my mouse is circling. So it starts with this building here is the tip of it. It goes down along the coast here.
Again, apologies for the, the choice of music there. But anyway, you get a bit of an idea of what that was about and how that was hopefully reinforcing what they were learning within English. And look, it worked incredibly well. And I believe proved what John Hattie said, that coherence across learning experiences strengthens transfer and depth of learning. Alignment doesn't require shared assessments, just shared vocabulary and intentional planning. Here's another example for you. Early in my teaching career, in fact, it was my first year and probably my first term even, I was teaching Year 6 and already I didn't like how I was expected to teach. And as a student, I detested school. As the way I was expected to learn didn't quite match how I needed to learn. And it was one of the main reasons that I became a teacher, you know, to hopefully teach students the way I think that they can learn best and what hopefully would work best for those students, obviously. So I wanted them to have a different experience to what I had growing up. And I decided to try something radical. I tasked my students with a project, and the project was to create a physical, tangible, 3D scaled version of a sustainable city. So in groups of 2 to 3, students were designated a portion of the city, and each group had certain landmarks that they had to include. And it was all based around science, maths, English, curricula, whatever curriculum you can think of. Now every lesson I would hold SIGs, which are special interest groups for students to attend, and when it was either appropriate or relevant for whatever part of the project they were working on, because they all had different roles within their groups, and so they could attend as much as they like, and I'd repeat these over time. And I teach things like, depending on what it was, might be, I don't know, measurement of regular and irregular shapes or whatever. So I held these SIGs quite regularly every lesson. Now, some students didn't attend the SIGs, some weren't as engaged as I'd hoped, or didn't contribute as much as I would have liked. Honestly, I probably didn't differentiate it sufficiently or appropriately. Some individuals and groups struggled to build it to scale as well. But despite these and some other challenges along the way, it proved to be highly successful for many of my students, if not all of them, in some way or form. And in fact, Cool Australia picked it up as one of their resources. I don't know if it's still available on Cool Australia's website, but they had it up there for many years. So it's one of them that I was pretty proud of. So here are 3 takeaways for you from today's session. The first one is that anti-racism and anti-discrimination learning are already part of the curriculum. Tokenism happens when ideas sit outside assessment, and embedding happens when concepts are revisited and explored through subject learning. The goal is not perfection, it's intentionality. So when you're back at school tomorrow, I urge you to choose one existing unit. Identify one concept. Might be fairness or representation, identity, voice, or power, for instance. Strengthen one question, strengthen one discussion, or even one assessment criterion, whatever it may be. Now, if you're looking for structured resources that map directly to the Australian, Victorian, and New South Wales curricula and support this kind of embedding without increasing workload, here comes the plug. We've developed materials through Click Against Hate that align in this way. So Click Against Hate is a free resource for every Australian school forever. And as I already mentioned, it's aligned to the Australian, Victorian, and New South Wales curricula. It's for students in years 5 to 10, where years 5 and 6 are grouped together, 7 and 8 are grouped together, and 9 and 10 are grouped together. Each grouping has 8 modules, which are divided amongst 4 key topic areas, being stereotypes and prejudices, media misrepresentation, discrimination, and online hate. Click Against Hate is modular, not linear. So it means you can pick and choose your modules on a needs basis for your class, your year level, your cohort, whoever it is you're working with. I like to give the analogy that it's not like IKEA, it's the opposite. You don't have to follow the arrows. You can simply do one module, or you can, like many of our almost 3,000 schools, you can embed all 8 modules for a year group, or in any order you see fit, or anything in between as well. It's designed for teachers to use the platform to teach the students. So therefore, teachers will need to familiarize themselves with a module and the lesson plan that accompanies that before they deliver it in class. And the reason we designed it so the students can't just go off and do it on their own in their own time is because we're dealing with potentially sensitive or even traumatic topics for some students, maybe teachers too. And the teachers know their students a lot better than we do. So having that support and guidance is critical and essential. Don't just take my word for it.
Been showing Click Against Hate and the benefits it can do for our school community. I think it's going to really work with our senior school using and learning about discrimination and hate speech. My observations, this is a very, very important program. And the way that it is delivered as well, being from the teacher, the contact point is there. I would definitely recommend this program.
It was great to have the guys from Click Against Hate out today. The platform is easy and user-friendly. From what I can see, it can certainly be used in my setting with students who have mild intellectual disabilities. I can certainly see this platform being a really great space to help us and help our teachers confidently teach to their classes. And I think that's one of the things about Click Against Hate is that, teachers need the resources behind them and they need the confidence to be able to present that. And the conversations that are generated today, I can see working in every setting.
I think this is a very good program for the students to learn about discrimination and just to think that we are all belong and we are human beings and everyone should be treated the same.
I would love to see this program extend to the community as well, because with our lower levels, they see their parents as their role models and they learn from them. So if our parents are given the insight of this program, that will get passed on to their children as well.
Click Against Hate, we ran through a lesson today. Really interactive, fantastic. Can't wait to take it back to my school. And I'm definitely picturing that our students will really engage with that kind of learning.
And there's no doubt that diversity and inclusivity is one of the highest priorities in the area. And a program like Click Against Hate goes a long way to making a positive change.
But whether you use external resources or not, the most powerful work remains curriculum strong, consistent, and thoughtfully planned. Here's one simple thing to try. Ask students in your next lesson, whose perspective might be missing here? So I'll finish with this final thought. Sometimes the most powerful curriculum change isn't a new lesson. It's a better question. So I'm Jeremy Kalbstein, Director of Education at Click Against Hate. Got my contact details there for you. Would love to connect with everybody and share this wonderful resource with you. Again, it's free and there's so much more that I could tell you about. can do free demos as well. Can talk about lots of different things. We have ambassador schools. Some of those schools you just saw were some of our ambassador schools who like to promote that they're a Click Against Hate accredited school and that they're anti-racism and anti-discrimination and so forth. So there's a lot that we can do, and we like to partner with schools. So please reach out. We'd love to have some conversations with you. And Justin, I'll hand it back to you, I guess.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, and thank you for providing those insights, as well as it's always nice as an educator to get the opportunity to access resources that help you in your work, particularly in a profession that can be historically time poor. I know that'll be a help to many educators. Very much my role, and I'm hoping everyone can see the screen that's come up in front of you. My role now is to probably talk about from the perspective of MacKillop's Relate education model, with a focus on the preconditions for supporting student engagement in this space, in this anti-racism and anti-discrimination space. Because really the goal of schools is to engage all students in this work. And I'm particularly going to focus on potentially hard to reach students, those students who may have difficulty accessing the full curriculum for a range of barriers. But also that means that they miss out on opportunities to learn in this anti-racism and anti-discrimination space. So I'm going to talk about that for the next kind of 20 or so minutes. And really where I'd like to start is the acknowledgement that as part of this work, we're entering students into conversations that may challenge their worldview or may be difficult in that space. And then that's particularly true for students who maybe have not experienced these conversations as much as others at home. And really what I want to talk to you about over this next 20 minutes is how we can support those who are potentially hardest to reach, or who find it most difficult to engage in this content, which, as Jeremy spoke about, is already within the curriculum and already part of what we're tasked to teach in our schools. Probably where I want to start with that is the importance of unconditional positive regard. And people might know Carl Rogers's work. And why we begin there is we talk about in any space where we're trying to create or support a person to positive growth and potentially change and growth, but also to question things like their biases or perspectives of not only themselves but others. We know that one thing that is essential for being able to inspire that growth and change is that our students and people need to feel that we believe in their absolute worth as people. And one of the reasons why, since Carl Rogers kind of spoke about that in kind of the 50s, it's underpinned, for example, almost all psychological intervention that's taken place, is the recognition that it's key. It's key in supporting growth and change. And I know for me, as an educator, when one of the things that can be challenging about unconditional positive regard is, I imagine most people in this room would say, yes, we believe it, we should have that in this space, is that, yes, it's about creating an environment where every student feels valued and worthy and accepted. We talk about it does at times take separating the person from behaviour, and why I'm speaking about that will become more evident as we talk here today. But also that students need to actually perceive and feel that acceptance. So it's not just about us providing unconditional positive regard, it's about students feeling and perceiving that. And some students in our classrooms might find that more difficult than others, for example, based on their past experiences. So it's in capturing all and engaging all students in this space, we have to acknowledge that our students might need some different things from us. And I guess that leads into, like all work we do here at MacKillop, a relational approach we see is absolutely important. in this space, because we know that young children, but also young people, experience the world, as we say here, through our relationships, whether that be relationships at home, in the community, but also in school. And that makes you as an educator really important in this space, in helping engage young people into anti-discrimination, anti-racism curriculum. We like to think about, for example, how we would talk about the relationship we need in this space is, yes, we might use the language of developmental relationship. We want students to be able to go out, engage in discussions, question perspectives, question or bias, or self-reflect and self-critique, and take those risks and be confident in that to engage in this curriculum. But we also know that they can't do that unless we firstly have a trusting relationship with them, one where they know they are safe to express themselves, one where they know we have their back, that we're there to protect them and to guide them in this space. And we would argue that almost that curriculum becomes inaccessible if we don't have that. So I've always found this helpful to think about the young people who might be struggling to engage in any of the content I work with, and quite often coming back to, have I established that trusting relationship first before that developmental relationship, particularly with those hard to read students in my class. So some of the tips that we might give in this space for being able to build secure developmental relationships with our students is definitely showing care, empathy, and understanding. It starts with, and that's important for this curriculum, to both model care, empathy, and understanding ourselves as adults. But students want to see that in us with them. Authentic connection, valuing who they are, their own identity. And we need to be really, by doing that, we show that we value them, and it can help us develop that relationship. We need to build trust in our students, and some of these will become evident in the next couple of slides, around, in this space, students knowing that we can notice and meet their needs. If they are quiet, that we can actually notice that and actually support them to engage. If they are having difficulty with it, instead of having to toil away, we're attuned to that. And we know attunement can really help build these relationships where access to this curriculum can really thrive. Responding to behaviour predictability. We're going to talk a little bit about behaviours we might see, for example, when we are asking students to challenge maybe their perspectives, of their own perspectives, or potentially the perspectives of family or community they have at home. And our response to that can either move them towards that curriculum or away from that curriculum. We have to be mindful of teaching boundaries and expectations, not just assuming that students know those boundaries and expectations. Are we clear as a whole staff, if we're teaching this across the curriculum? Are we aware as a whole team of what the boundaries and expectations are in this space? And do we actually explicitly teach it to students? And then lastly, we always come back to, like any curriculum, there is space for playfulness and shared laughter. And we know that is one of the best ways to both build relationship and engage students in this space. So I don't know if this connects with anybody, but I might go back to myself as a young educator many years ago now. I was far less grey than what I was. I'm probably a few sizes of shirt, to put it lightly, bigger than what I was back in the day. But I know that, like many of us, I came to the profession really with a social justice lens, really, and wanting to do good in the world, wanting to make the world a better place, and big ideas. And could find myself with a passion for for ensuring that we've got a just society in this space and having these conversations with students. But what I quickly realised is that when you do have open and honest dialogue around racism, discrimination, or any form of discrimination, as well as any other conversations that can challenge our worldview, that if you create a safe enough space and students are allowed to express themselves, what you might get might be against what you're trying to say. We might experience things like an attitude of hate might come up in our classroom, or a racist ideology, or discrimination. And I know when I was young, I probably did something like this cycle on the screen, which we would call something like a dysregulation cycle with young people, where I would be teaching content or inviting students to engage in content, a student that would challenge a student in a certain way, and that's that top of that grid on your screen. And a student might react to that or express an opinion that is not in line with my or the school's ethical viewpoint, or the ethical viewpoint of our Australian curriculum. And I guess the second picture in that cycle was when that happens, we have a reaction to that. As educators and adults, we firstly have an emotional reaction to that. And if we can't manage that emotion in that space, what we might see is the third part of that cycle, where our ability to deal with it or think through what's needed in this space can be limited, and we might find ourselves doing things like acting on emotion, acting angrily, becoming dysregulated ourselves. And I know I could see myself at times almost shutting down the conversation, going back at a student saying that's not right, and almost putting them in their place, without realizing that reaction just makes this cycle continue. Then when I'm going to teach something else, the student's less likely to engage in it well because our relationship's ruptured. And again, they may be more likely to express and become dysregulated themselves. And this cycle continues, which I thought was me standing up for an ethical position. But I now realised, not meaning to, what I was actually doing was shutting down learning in this space and disengaging that young person, that child or young person, from this conversation. So we really believe that emotional self-regulation, we believe that's a critical educator skill in all circumstances anyway. But it's a great example in this space of how important that is, how we manage responses that we might get that do challenge us, that challenge other students in this space. So you might see this from the co-regulation cycle, which we would call a learning cycle, where learning can happen. Firstly, we would much rather a student engage in this conversation than not say it, for fear that it's the wrong thing to say, because then learning can't happen anyway in the first place. If a student is challenged by that concept, you'll see the first step is exactly the same. We might get that reaction from a student who might start to become dysregulated themselves, which can happen if we're challenging their worldview, if we're challenging maybe the worldview of others in their space. But the difference is coming from that with self-regulation as an educator, with it starting with curiosity in that space. You'll see the third added step in that, which is, how do we actually co-regulate with that young person? How do we listen to them? How do we help move them into an emotional state where they can engage positively in this space? And you'll see from that fourth step in this cycle, that allows us then to have meaningful conversations and move students forward, where they can learn from us through ongoing discussion. And now we've got learning happening. So I don't know if you connect with that, but certainly that was a big learning for me. I think it's a learning that many of you in this room already know. You already do this in your practice day to day. But for example, you may not have the language to talk about that with a colleague who might be struggling in this space, but it is a cycle that I've seen many educators go through, and learning in this space and how we engage young people so that we're not turning them away, we're not disengaging them from the conversations that we need to have in the classroom. So a few strategies that have helped that might be practical in this space that I've certainly done working in communities, working with young people who might have be beginning with attitudes or beliefs that are different to mine, different to that we believe are important in Australia and within our curriculum. Is some things we can do in the moment to help stop ourselves from acting emotionally towards that student. Things like internal checkings. How am I feeling right now? I know it's a big part of my self-regulation plan in this space is kind of, naming is taming that emotion. So not just jumping in with a reply, actually tuning to ourselves first. Positive mantras can be, and positive self-talk have really helped me. Just simple things like I'd often play over in my head, this is a learning opportunity. Accept the behavior, this is a learning opportunity. We know to calm our own, for example, autonomic nervous system and to activate the ventral vagus nerve that we can do things like breathing exercises can help us calm quickly in that moment, whether that be internal kind of box breathing or taking a deep breath. Also mindfulness, awareness of our body, being consciously drawn to feeling our feet on the ground and moving up and your legs and into your body and being aware of that. We know other things that can help mitigate that stress response is things like soothing pressure, even just the rubbing of the hands or the shoulders in that moment can be really helpful. I know mindful movement, being mindful of that. I stretch my ankles, which is a big thing for me to counter that stress activation. Cold exposure. I was speaking to an educator recently who was talking about they'd have hand cream in their room that they would use whenever they started becoming stressed, and they would put that on as a moment of cold exposure. I get a dry mouth when I start to become stressed, so I always have a drink of water for saliva activation, or even running my tongue across my teeth at the top or bottom. Even just simple tapping, or I've seen teachers, particularly in the primary school space, go into a humming exercise. But really, if we want to respond well to students who are either disengaged from this content or at risk of disengaging, our own emotional self-regulation is essential. A couple of other things, and this is what I'll end with today, that we need, and we go back to our theory around what we need to really, all our students need to feel safe to engage in this content. And we like to draw our attention to proactive ways that we do that. What am I talking about when I'm talking about proactive ways to create a safe space? How can we reduce unnecessarily stresses, knowing that some of this content, particularly if we are challenging worldview, might create more stress? Can we take out unnecessary stress, and how do we build kind of relationships and not only the coping skills but the skills of our students to engage in this space? Within MacKillop, we will always come back to the core four of creating a safe, engaged learning environment. I'm not going to talk too much in these closing kind of minutes around structure and routine, but we know they are safe. So what do I mean by that? Are we preparing students? Do they know what's happening in our lessons now, today, in the future? Do they have the opportunity to think through these concepts before they come to class, and so that they know what to expect, because we know that can reduce stress? Do we do things like routines when we're teaching this content? Do we have routines, things that if students are challenged by the content, there's opportunities to undertake tasks that they know and that they can master, so it's still a positive in that lesson and can come back to it? Generally, schools know about structure and routine and do that relatively well. The things that I think are really important in this space that I want to focus on today is so that's designing our environment, structure and routine in our environment for safety and engagement. How do we respond and this is the yellow ones down the bottom, in ways that are predictable and consistent to create safety and engagement, particularly in this anti-racism and anti-discrimination space. So when we talk about predictability, we might use that differently. How do students know how we as adults will approach them in different situations? And this is really important. Obviously, for us with our class, it might be important, but actually it's far more powerful if students know that school-wide. If we do have a discussion around this, if there is, if we want to have a discussion where we challenge bias, we challenge attitudes, for example, are we predictable in how we respond to that as adults, or are students not sure how we'll respond, which will likely mean they shut down in this space and they won't enter into that conversation? And then secondly, around consistency, which is about our students knowing expectations and norms in this space. And how they do that is through us teaching them, not assuming that they're all coming from the same standpoint with the same view, but us explicitly teaching what are the norms, what are our non-negotiables in this space, and teaching as to why they are. You know, a great example might be coming together and talking about how we talk to it is hate, or how we talk to hate as a it's non-negotiable that we are anti-hate in this space, that we are about human dignity, that we are about anti-racism and anti-discrimination in this space. So I want to touch on these a little bit, because we like to sometimes kind of delve deeper in this last 4 minutes about what we mean. The first one is around predictability and some of the things we know that can help us become predictable as adults in this space. And one of the ways we do that is practicing, which I won't go into today, but essential educated dispositions, but shared values. Before we teach these kind of units, do we as a school get together and talk about, as adults, what are our shared values in this space? An example might be, we might talk about cultural humility as something that is essential in this space and we need to practice together. That's a term, but what does that actually mean in our space? Practicing kind of that compassionate self-reflection and self-critique, and making this a culturally safe space for all. Do we have those discussions as adults? And so that we can then model them consistently in our space, so that students can see the kind of behaviours we want them to have when talking about this. I've already spoken about treating adult self-regulation as an essential educator skill and why that's essential in this space. Because we know that one of the ways that we learn self-regulation and ability to manage our emotions in this space is through experiential learning. So our students experiencing and seeing us self-regulate our own emotions in this space. Do we utilise things like shared responses to student either disengagement from content or dysregulation when talking about content? Do we actually speak about this? What is our response? We would talk about having a curious response at all times. Can we have a script around that? And ensuring that if we do get in that space where we aren't regulated and where we do have a rupture in relationship, whether that be because we, or more likely the student, can't manage a disagreement when it comes on perspectives in the space, do we make sure that we commit to repairing that relationship as soon as possible, because that's the way we're going to move forward and ultimately engage students. And then the last one for me is around consistency. And the reason I want to touch on this is quite often in our work with schools, so one of the great pleasures I have is now working with schools kind of across the country of all kinds, around safety and engagement, is that quite often we can agree as schools and adults on things like norms or expectations as words. So respect might be one that's put out there as a value and one of our norms we're teaching too, but we don't always then have a discussion about what that looks like in this space, which means people end up going on their own understanding of what respect means, and we become absolutely inconsistent in how we teach that in this space. So we need to make space to have those conversations. We talk about things like self-regulation plans, talking about having strategies to self-regulate in this space, and talking about that as an essential educator skill is important. How are we going to support students? Are we talking about, as a reminder that hard to reach students in this space are often the ones who all throughout schooling miss opportunities to talk about these kind of topics and discussions? Are we actually looking at, are they missing out on that in their day-to-day work? And really just being able to, as adults in this space, instead of students having to learn about this from adults coming from all different perspectives, how do we come together as a group to create that consistency in our teaching? So that kind of closes me out for today. I do want to transition us now into a Q&A, particularly as I hope many of you will have discussions, particularly for Jeremy in this space around his talk and what he spoke about. As a lead into the Q&A, I might ask you just to take a few moments, and we'll cut this out of the recording because it'll be a bit awkward just to have silence for a few moments. But I just want to invite you to enter into this reflection, and it might open up some questions that you might want to ask. So we kind of call this a head, heart, and hands reflection. I just really encourage you to sit back and think about, is there anything, particularly from Jeremy's talk or my own, that something you think differently about, or did you gain a new understanding, or was it could have been just affirming to your practice as well? Maybe something you feel differently about, whether that's towards yourself or students you work with, or all this content, or something that you will do differently, the hands in this space. So we might just give you a few moments of quiet contemplation. For those of you that need to go get a drink before Q&A, now's a great time as well. But we'll probably go for 3 to 4 minutes, and then come back, and I'm going to encourage you to write as many questions as you can into that chat. And Jeremy and myself will do the best we can to answer that as well. Okay, and as we just, you can continue going for this last minute, but I just want to welcome to the chat. I know even from seeing some of the people in the room, and knowing of you, that there's a lot of wisdom in the room as well. So as we say, questions are very much welcome, but also you might have wisdom or perspectives that you want to share in this space, whether that's wisdom as an educator, could be your cultural wisdom that you want to share. We just welcome any of that as well. So we'll give you another 30 seconds to think through some questions that you might want to put to the room. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I can see we've got our first question, which is great. Thank you, Lizzie. Thank you for that. I'll put this one. So Jeremy, this is probably a perfect one for you to start with. So we'll take you off mute and go, any examples of how schools have included their community, including families, into an anti-racism approach?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's certainly an area that I'm keen to explore more of within Click and Tate, because we're limited in I don't know if influence is the right word, maybe impact. What you do in the classroom and what is done outside of the classroom, can sometimes be competing. So it can be quite a challenging thing. But examples of how schools have included, I don't have any specific ones, I'll be honest, because it really comes down to how the schools themselves implement our platform and how they go about working with families. I know we've had a lot of requests in the past to do things with families. So, running presentations, we've done that sort of thing. The issue with it, I believe, is that the people who attend those things are the ones who don't need to, generally speaking. And so reaching the other ones is always the challenge, which is possibly where this question is coming from as well. But I'm afraid I actually don't have any specific examples that I can share with you. I think it's one of the greatest challenges with this sort of thing. Yeah, I think what I would like to implement that I think might help with this sort of thing is focusing more on students. So, for example, I mentioned earlier about us having ambassador schools. I would like to have ambassadors who are students and ambassadors who are teachers as well, and having the students getting involved in some additional activities and events and learning around this area, and then taking that to the community, ideally within their school community, but also beyond that. I think that's the sort of thing that can have an impact on the families as well. But we're a very small team and we can't do that on our own. So we need to bring in the schools and help get them to help us with that. And I think that's one approach that could work. I do know, actually, I'm trying to think, every school implements it differently. So that's the thing. It's hard for me to sort of pick an example, but yeah, there's a school here in Melbourne that is looking at how to do this, and we're actually going to be partnering with them on this particular topic to come up with a pilot to see if we can roll that out eventually at some stage. But I don't have an example for you right now, I'm afraid.
I don't know if this is helpful either to the room or to Jared. So please, in the comments, you can come back. But it's interesting, particularly in this kind of anti-racism and anti-discrimination space. I've seen a couple, just working with schools and school leaders, I've seen a couple of approaches to that, and there's one I much prefer, but I say it with a bit of caution because I know we're already time poor in school and not adding extra responsibility onto schools because it can just seem like adding responsibility. But I've certainly seen an approach, or I've spoken to leaders who are like, I almost don't want to share what we're doing because I'm worried about the conversations will open up and then it will be difficult because we'll have parents calling in, etc. But the approach that I think is the responsible one that I love personally is many leaders and educators just sharing what's happening in class, what the learning is, knowing that that might mean that some parents get in contact with the school because it doesn't quite align with what they're doing, but sees that as an opportunity to have a respectful, open discussion as part of our responsibility to not only our children but the wider community in this space. So I'm not sure if that's helpful, and I say it with caution because I'm always worried about putting more and more responsibility on for example, principals and leaders who already have a lot. But I know it makes me smile when I see leaders in schools who are so passionate about it that they're doing that. I've got one here. This is an interesting one from Joe, Jeremy, and I'm interested to get your take on this one. So Joe was speaking about how sometimes they use AI to review lessons for cultural sensitivity, which has been surprisingly helpful, I imagine, in picking things up. I might not use it to review a unit, so give me ideas about how I can include anti-racism concepts.
So, sorry, I'm trying to understand. So, are you wanting ideas around how to include anti-racism concepts into a unit?
Yeah, it looks like Joe's looking to be practical. Saying that, in a very poor English teacher's life, which we can understand. Yeah.
Yeah, look, like I said before with Click and Tape, we cover 4 key areas. Obviously, you could look at additional ones beyond that, but the 4, I'll just remind you of what they are again, which are stereotypes and prejudices, media misrepresentation, discrimination, and online hate. I think if you sort of base it around though, I mean, everything almost comes out of that in a sense. I mean, you can look at it, there is unfortunately a bit of a ladder with how these things progress when you start with stereotypes and bias and leading to discrimination, and then where that can lead, hopefully not, but it can lead to physical violence and so forth. So they're the sorts of the concepts that I would be focusing on, because they apply to every form of discrimination out there. And sadly, there are a lot of forms of discrimination. So I think if you just sort of narrow down the focus into some key areas like that would probably be the easiest way to do it. Otherwise, it just becomes this big thing. Like if you focus more, I think, on a specific form of discrimination, I don't know where that's going to lead. I think it's more about focusing on the general sort of thing around discrimination, and then what are the strategies that can help with that, rather than focusing specifically on racism, or unless of course it's a particular interest because you might have a specific area of concern, or it's relevant to your school or cohort. Then I think if you can just sort of focus on the generic side of it around the different forms of different ways to respond to discrimination, and the strategies around that, and I think that would be probably the best way. But without knowing the context, it's a bit hard. But yeah, I think unless it's a specific on, like I said, for your demographic at your school or something like that, then I think, yeah, that's probably one way of doing it. There'd be more, but that's just one that comes off the top of my head. Do you have any thoughts on that, Justin? Anything else that you can think of?
No, I think you're pretty good there, Jeremy. Yeah, I think I do. Yeah, it does make me wonder, though. Do you see, particularly in your work, educators who might be nervous about being in this space? Now, clearly, Click and Take is resource and support for that. Any indication of what kind of barriers we see that our teams might experience in schools that you think are good to acknowledge? And
Yeah, look, I mean, that's the one you mentioned there is probably one of my, it's the right way of framing it, but one of my favorites in terms of, I think it's a key concern. It's easier to avoid talking about racism or discrimination rather than addressing it if you're uncomfortable about it and you're worried about the language you use and you don't want to offend or you don't want to say the wrong thing, and then you get parent backlash and whatever. So there is that whole consideration. So yeah, I do think that is a major barrier. I think there's also this perception, which I've tried to address today, that it's to address it is another thing that you've got to do as a teacher. And I think it's really just about being efficient and where it can fit in. So hopefully from today's session, it's not seen that way. And I sort of touched on it a moment ago as well. There's also the worry about that parental backlash or community backlash as well. There's also, I mean, we try to teach students these days, about having a growth mindset. Unfortunately, the reality, I believe, is not necessarily there, not just for students, but also for teachers and schools. And I think there are some schools that would have the belief that we don't have a problem here with that sort of thing, or, there's no bullying at our school and these sorts of things, when, the reality is it's probably bullying at every school. So I think that's another barrier to it. Every teacher, every staff member brings their own discourse to their work and their own. You mentioned values earlier. That really resonated with me, because it's, everybody has their own values. You might have the school values and vision and these sorts of things, but everybody still has their own values, and they may at times be competing. And so you might get staff resistance, or you might not have an equal display of the values between staff. And that to me is really crucial, because they're the ones who are modeling to the students and also to the wider community as to how to react and respond and these sorts of things. So I think that's a crucial one of it. You can also have an issue with leadership. Perhaps there's just no buy-in or lack of buy-in from the leaders for whatever reason. Hopefully not with our one around the financial side of it, because ours is free, but most other things aren't. So having that leadership buy-in is a critical element to it as well. There's also, we've had a lot of teachers worried about triggering things in their students as well, and which is why I mentioned that we have it designed to have that teacher guidance and support, because it's, in a way, it's a one-size-fits-all sort of a platform, which most things would be, but the discussions that are had from that make it a bit more personalized, so it can be quite triggering in that regard, but it also makes it richer and deeper at the same time. So it's really important that you have that knowledge and understanding of the teachers as to who is in their class, what might be triggering and what might not be, and what they may want to leave out or gloss over, or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe they want to go deeper into it. So that sort of thing. I think they're probably the main ones that come to mind.
Yeah.
It's a good question. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think taking that approach of cultural humility, that we're all on a journey and we're all learning, can be empowering and stop us from feeling like we have to walk on those eggshells as well in the space. And there's one from Violet. So Lizzie's put a resource into the chat, which is great to look at. I think that ongoing learning and growth is using resources and capturing other voices as well. But Bradley's also got a good question. Any advice on balancing the tension between semi-rural spaces which might have a Caucasian or Anglo-Saxon majority is high, and often students are forming quick stereotypes when learning about different cultures due to lack of exposure?
Well, I think, anything around stereotypes, I think that the simple way of addressing it is, it just comes down to a lack of exposure and understanding. Easier said than done in many cases, so I'm not saying it's necessarily easy to do, but the more people can be exposed to different cultures, the greater their understanding and acceptance of them will be. And so the challenge you got there, obviously, with having that Anglo sort of majority, is that you need to embed it. I mean, I was talking about that earlier. It's got to be about embedding and not that tokenistic sort of reaction to it, and trying to build a deeper understanding amongst all the different students and different backgrounds that are present, and getting them to understand and appreciate and almost immerse them at times in these different cultures, so they have a better understanding of them and a greater awareness. And the more you're aware of it, the better it will hopefully make it within that environment. I think I mean, stereotypes is the start of it, and if you can nip it at that point, then I think it will address a lot of issues down the track. But obviously, it's a challenge. It's not an easy thing to do. There's only, you're limited time-wise, so it comes down to that, finding a way to integrate it into what you're already doing and where it is in the curriculum, rather than having it as another thing that you add on, which again comes back to that tokenistic sort of response. I hope I'm addressing the question. I'm not sure if I am, but I hope I am.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like what you're saying is recognizing that, for example, you don't have cultural authority in that space, and bringing in voices that allows you to then bring in voices that do is maybe a starting point.
Yeah, and it's that whole thing again of it's kind of like squeaky wheel sort of a situation when if you've got a majority of one sort of culture, it's going to be louder and more prominent and more dominant, most likely, and it can often make the smaller cultures more marginalized. And so it's really pertinent that you try to give them a voice, and that voice will help the larger culture hopefully have a greater understanding of them. And so trying to not necessarily balance it out. It's not about fairness. It's just about everybody coming on board and recognizing and acknowledging and understanding each other, and what's the word I'm looking for? Celebrating, I suppose, the differences, because it's really, that's what it comes down to. It's not just the similarities. It's what are the differences, and they're not necessarily bad. They're just different. So let's try and celebrate them and highlight them and get people on board with them, sort of thing.
Yeah. Beautiful. And I think that might be the last question there. And I know, speaking about time for educators, we like to get a bit of time back where we can. But probably I'll just share my screen again, unless any come through now. I thank you for answering those, Jeremy. And I do that knowing that this is only part one of kind of a four-parter. So, when answering questions too, you try not to give away stuff that'll come up next. And the next webinar is on the 1st of June, and it's around teaching without harm and really looking into the pedagogy space, which I think will be fascinating. As I say, you'll be joined by Chris Higgins, the director at the MacKillop Institute, for those sessions and the ones afterwards. So I really encourage people to go to those, and as I say, get the complete experience. I think it's fair to say, though, that we would like to thank everyone for your participation. Keep an eye on your emails on our website. So whether that be the MacKillop Institute, and there's a QR code there, or Click Against Hate as well, and reach out as needed. But we'd really like to thank you for not only your kind of participation and showing up today at the end of a school day, and some of you would have come straight from school into this, but also for your just dedication in supporting the holistic development of your children, your young people, and your communities. I think we all owe educators a great debt in that space. So thank you for coming in today. I don't know if you've got anything you'd like to leave with, Jeremy.
Look, thank you from me and from Click Against Hate as well. And also, just those questions were fantastic. And so if you have any more, I'd love you to send them through to me, to my email. And if there are any schools that would like to work with us to see if we can help resolve any of these issues, be happy to discuss that with you as well. So please, connect with me. I think it'd be great. And I look forward to hopefully meeting all of you at the next webinar, or face-to-face, or wherever it may be. So, and thank you to MacKillop Institute also for the opportunity. So it's great. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Have a great night, everybody.